My ex-wife slid an envelope across the kitchen table with 2 fingers while our 4-year-old ate cereal in the next room. It was a court-filed paternity test, and when she said "Don't fight this or I'll drag your brother into everything," I already knew exactly what everything meant. She slid the envelope across the kitchen table like she was serving me papers, which I suppose she was. No expression. No preamble. Just the envelope, face down, pushed across the wood with 2 fingers, and then she folded her hands and waited. I looked at the envelope. I looked at her. I said, "What is this?" She said, "Open it." I opened it. It was a request for a court-ordered paternity test for our daughter. Submitted through her attorney. Already filed. Already in the system. The ink was not wet because the ink had been dry for 3 days before she decided to tell me about it by sliding it across our kitchen table at 7 in the morning while our daughter was eating cereal in the next room. Our daughter. Emma. 4 years old. Who had my nose and my mother's eyes and who called me daddy the way children call their fathers daddy, without thinking about it, the way they breathe. I put the papers down on the table. I looked at my ex-wife, a woman named Diane, and I tried to find the person I had married inside the face she was showing me, and I could not find her. That face had been gone for a while. I just had not fully accepted it until that moment. I said, "You cannot be serious." She said, "I am completely serious." I said, "Diane. Emma is my daughter." She looked at me with the specific stillness of someone who has rehearsed a conversation many times and has arrived at the real version feeling very prepared. She said, "That may not be something you can prove." And then she said the other thing. The thing that landed differently than the paternity test, harder, in a deeper place. She said, "Do not fight this. Do not lawyer up against me on this specific issue. Because if you do, I will make sure your brother gets dragged into everything." And you know what everything means. I knew what everything meant. I sat at my kitchen table and I let the silence sit between us and I thought about my brother and I thought about Emma in the next room eating cereal and I thought about the specific calculation that Diane had clearly been running for some time, the one where she had found the exact pressure point and pressed it until she got what she wanted. I said, "I'll take the test." She nodded. She picked up her coffee cup. She said, "I think that's the right decision." And I sat there and I watched her drink her coffee at our kitchen table, in the house we had bought together, 3 feet from the room where our daughter was eating cereal, and I thought, I need to tell you the whole story. Because the whole story is the only thing that explains how we got to that table. Let me go back. Because this story does not start with an envelope. It starts the way these stories always start, with 2 people who made sense together for long enough that neither of them noticed when they stopped. Diane and I met when we were 27. She was working in finance. I was in commercial real estate. We were in the same social circle, the kind of overlapping professional-personal world that cities produce where everyone seems to know everyone through 2 or 3 connections, and she came to a rooftop birthday party for a mutual friend and we talked for 3 hours and I drove her home and we were together from that point forward with the specific momentum of people who have found something and do not want to lose the feeling of having found it. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged. We got married in a vineyard in September, which I know sounds like a cliché but it was one of the best days of my life and I am not embarrassed to say that. My brother Nathan was my best man. He gave a speech that made everyone laugh and made my mother cry and I stood next to him at the altar and I thought, this is what I have. A woman I love and a brother like this. That is enough for anyone. Nathan is 2 years older than me. He has always been the one people gravitate toward, the one who makes a room lighter just by being in it. Growing up we were close in the way brothers can be close when they are far enough apart in personality that there is no competition, just complementarity. He was the social one. I was the methodical one. He got into things and I helped him figure out how to get out of them. That dynamic ran the length of our relationship like a river through a landscape, always there, always moving in the same direction. I am telling you about Nathan because Nathan is central to this story in a way that I need you to understand before I tell you the rest. Diane and Nathan got along. That is the sentence I keep returning to, the one I have examined more times than I can count, and what I keep noticing is how neutral it is. They got along. Not, they were close. Not, they had a particular chemistry. Not, there were moments I noticed and filed away. They got along. Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, the ordinary social furniture of a family. He was at our house regularly. He was funny with her in the way he was funny with everyone. She laughed at his jokes the way everyone laughed at his jokes. I did not see it. I want to be clear about that because I know how it sounds. I want to be clear that I was not willfully blind, I was not ignoring something obvious, I was a man living inside a marriage that felt normal to him and trusting the people in his immediate world in the way that you trust people you have chosen and who have chosen you back. I did not see it until it was shown to me. Emma was born in the 3rd year of our marriage. Labor was 22 hours and I was there for all of it, which is the kind of statement that sounds sentimental until you have actually done it, until you have stood in a room for 22 hours watching someone you love go through something enormous and felt completely helpless and completely necessary at the same time. She was born at 4:33 a.m. and she was the most specific looking baby I had ever seen. She looked like a person immediately, not the generic newborn blur that some babies have but an actual specific face, and the face was mine. I could see myself in her in the way that you can see yourself in something and know, without any question, that the thing is yours. I brought her home. I learned to be a father. I was not always good at it, not at first, because nobody is good at it at first, but I tried in all the ways that matter and I was present and I loved her in a way that had no ceiling. The marriage started fraying around Emma's second birthday. Not dramatically. Gradually, the way things erode, through the accumulation of small failures and small distances and small moments where connection was available and neither of us reached for it. We tried counseling. We went to 4 sessions and then stopped going, which in retrospect was the decision that sealed the outcome. We stayed together for another year, going through the motions of a functional marriage, and then one evening in November we had a conversation in the kitchen that was quiet and honest and adult and that ended with both of us understanding that we were done. The divorce was filed in January. Emma was 3. Here is the thing about divorces with children that nobody tells you going in: the divorce itself is not the hardest part. The hardest part is everything the divorce reveals about who the people were the whole time. You learn things about each other in the dissolution that you could not have known during the construction, because construction requires cooperation and dissolution requires the abandonment of it, and when cooperation goes away you find out what was underneath it. What was underneath Diane was something I had not anticipated. She was strategic in a way that was not immediately obvious because strategy that is well executed looks like reasonableness until the moment it does not. She was reasonable about the initial custody arrangement, agreeable about the logistics, adult about the communication. I thought, this is going to be okay. I thought, we are going to be the divorced parents who handle it well. I was wrong about what reasonableness can be deployed in service of. The first sign was small. A schedule conflict that she created and then blamed on me. An email to the mediator that described an incident in terms that were accurate in their facts and completely distorted in their framing. A comment she made to Emma, overheard by my mother on a pickup, that was technically innocent and contextually pointed. Small things. Individually deniable. Collectively directional. I hired an attorney 4 months into the process, which was 2 months later than I should have. His name was Gregory Marsh, a family law specialist with 23 years of experience and the specific calm of a man who has seen every version of this situation and is no longer surprised by any of them. He listened to what I told him and he said, "She's building something. I'm not sure what yet, but she's building something." He was right. She was building the paternity test. What I have to tell you now is the part of this story that I did not tell anyone for a long time. The part that Diane had over me. The thing that everything meant when she said she would drag my brother into everything. About 8 months before the divorce was filed, before the kitchen conversation in November, during the period when the marriage was eroding and neither of us had acknowledged it out loud yet, Nathan called me. He called me at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday and he said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to let me finish before you respond." I let him finish. He told me that he had made an extremely poor decision. He told me that there had been a period, about 2 years before this phone call, when things with Diane and me were going through one of our harder stretches, and that he and Diane had been in contact in a way that he was ashamed of and that he had ended and that he had been carrying ever since. He did not use specific words, but he did not need to use specific words. He was crying by the time he finished. He said, "She was the one who reached out." He said, "That is not an excuse." He said, "I ended it after 3 months and I have not contacted her that way since." He said, "I am telling you because I cannot carry it anymore and because you deserve to know." I did not say anything for a long time. He said my name. He said, "I am so sorry." I said, "When?" He told me when. The timing landed on me like something physical. Emma had been conceived during the period he described. Not certainly, not provably, but possibly. The window existed. The possibility existed. I sat with that for a long time after we got off the phone. I am not going to tell you I handled it well in those first weeks, because I did not. I am not going to tell you I immediately forgave my brother, because I did not. What I will tell you is that I knew Nathan, had known him for 38 years, and I believed that the call had cost him more than anything I could extract from him, and I believed that carrying it had been its own punishment, and I made a decision to deal with it in a way that did not destroy the only family I had left. I dealt with it privately. I dealt with it with Nathan, in a series of conversations that were some of the hardest I have ever had. I dealt with it in therapy, alone, for 6 months. And I did not deal with it in any legal forum or public context because Emma was not yet 2 years old and she did not need to be a piece of evidence in her own parents' war. Diane knew about this. Diane had been there, on one side of it. And Diane had kept it as a weapon. And when the custody negotiation reached a point where she felt she was losing ground, she unholstered it. That is what was in the envelope on the kitchen table. That is what everything meant. I called Gregory Marsh that morning after Diane left for work. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "She filed already. Which means she believes the test could go either way and she's prepared for both outcomes." I said, "What does that mean for custody?" He said, "If the test comes back negative, she argues you're not the biological father and seeks to reduce your parental rights. If it comes back positive, she's still established a legal record of doubt that she can use to create instability in the arrangement going forward. Either way, she's on a fence." I said, "And if I fight the test?" He said, "She involves your brother. Which introduces a third party into a custody proceeding and creates a level of complexity and publicity and family fracture that is going to make everything significantly harder for everyone." I said, "She has thought this through." He said, Yes. She has. I sat with that. I thought about Emma eating cereal in the next room. I thought about Nathan. I thought about the call at 11 p.m. and the crying and I am so sorry. I thought about the specific cruelty of someone taking another person's worst moment and their worst mistake and their private grief and turning it into legal strategy. I said, I'm going to take the test. Gregory said, are you sure? I said, run the test. Whatever it says, I'm Emma's father. Nothing that comes back from a lab changes that. He said, legally it might. I said, then we deal with legally. I hung up. I went to the next room and I watched Emma eat cereal and I thought about all the ways love is something you choose, not something you prove, and I thought about how the law does not always agree with that. The test took 9 days to come back. 9 days during which I went to work and picked Emma up from preschool and gave her baths and read her the same 3 books she always wanted in the same order she always wanted them and sat on the edge of her bed after she fell asleep and looked at her face in the dim light from the hallway nightlight. She had my nose. I kept coming back to that. My nose, my mother's eyes, a specific way of tilting her head when she was thinking about something that I had seen in photographs of myself as a child. I looked at her and I thought, whatever that paper says, this is mine. This is not a biological question. This is a 4-year-old who calls me daddy without thinking about it, the way she breathes. No lab result changes what is in this room right now. I told myself that every night for 9 days. Some nights I believed it more than others. Gregory called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my car in the parking garage at work. He said, the test came back. I said, tell me. He said, you're the biological father. Unambiguous. 99.97%. I sat in my car in the parking garage. I thought I would feel relief and I did feel relief, but underneath the relief was something else, something harder to name. Anger, maybe. Not at the result. At the question. At the 9 days. At the envelope on the kitchen table and the 2 fingers in Diane's face, prepared and rehearsed, waiting for me to open what she had built. I said, what happens now? Gregory said, now we go back on offense. I want to tell you what happened to Diane's strategy when it failed, because I think it is important for this story to show what happens when a weapon misfires. She had built her case around the paternity question. She had structured her argument, her positioning, her leverage, around the possibility that the test would create doubt. When the test created no doubt, the structure lost its foundation. And the act of filing the test, the documented use of it as a tactical tool during custody proceedings, became something that Gregory was able to bring before the court as evidence of Diane's willingness to weaponize a child's identity for legal advantage. The judge was a woman named Honorable Clara Simmons. She had been on the family court bench for 16 years. She read the timeline. She looked at when the test was filed relative to where the custody negotiation was. She asked Diane's attorney several questions that were phrased as questions and functioned as observations. I sat at the table next to Gregory and I watched Diane's attorney answer those questions and I watched Diane sit very still next to him and I thought about the envelope, the 2 fingers, the coffee cup. The custody arrangement that came out of those proceedings gave me primary physical custody. Diane has regular visitation. The house, which was in both our names, was sold and the proceeds split. She moved into an apartment on the other side of the city. I am not telling you this to gloat. I am telling you this because the story matters. Because she had calculated everything and the calculation failed, not because I outmaneuvered her but because the truth was the truth and it kept being the truth regardless of what she had built around it. Nathan came to see me about 2 weeks after the results came back. He stood at my door and I let him in and we sat in the kitchen, the same table, and we talked for almost 3 hours. I do not want to characterize those 3 hours as reconciliation because that word implies a cleanness that was not there. It was difficult in the specific way that conversations between people who love each other and have genuinely wounded each other are difficult. There was no version of it that felt good. There was no version where anything was undone. What there was, at the end of 3 hours, was something like an agreement. Not about what had happened. Not about whether it was forgivable, because I am still working on what forgivable means in this context and I may be working on it for the rest of my life. The agreement was about going forward. About Emma. About what I needed from him and what he was capable of giving and whether those 2 things were close enough together to build something on. I will tell you that Nathan has been at every one of Emma's birthday parties since. I will tell you that she still runs to the door when she hears his car, the way children run to someone they associate entirely with warmth. I will tell you that I have stood in kitchen doorways and watched that and felt something complicated that has more than one feeling inside it and I have not tried to flatten it into something simpler, because it is not simple and pretending it is would be dishonest. I chose to keep him. I want to be clear that it was a choice. It remains a choice, renewed, every time I see him. I am not offering that as wisdom. I am offering it as fact. Diane reached out once, about 4 months after the custody ruling. A text, not an email, which told me something about how she wanted the conversation to feel, more casual than it had any right to be. She said she wanted to talk about Emma's school situation and about whether there was a way to co-parent more effectively. I showed the text to Gregory. He said it was probably genuine, that post-ruling behavior in custody cases often shifts toward cooperation once the adversarial structure has been resolved by the court. He said engaging was likely in Emma's best interest if I could do it without putting myself back in a vulnerable position. I texted back. I said I was open to talking about Emma's school situation. I said I was glad to co-parent effectively and that I had always wanted that. I did not say anything about the envelope. I did not say anything about the 2 fingers or the test or the 9 days in the parking garage. I said what needed to be said for Emma and I kept the rest in the sealed room where I have learned to keep the things that do not serve anyone if they stay out in the open. She called the next evening. We talked for 40 minutes about pickup schedules and Emma's new preschool classroom and a concern the teacher had raised about Emma's adjustment to the change in home situations. We were adult and cooperative and focused on our daughter. It was, on the surface, exactly what a functional post-divorce co-parenting conversation is supposed to look like. I hung up and I sat in the quiet kitchen and I thought about how much information is not in a functional surface. How much is underneath it? How a conversation can be entirely correct in its content and still cost something to have. I poured a glass of water. I drank it. I went to check on Emma. She was asleep in the way she always sleeps, arms out, completely committed to it, her stuffed dog tucked under one arm. I stood in the doorway for a while. The nightlight made the room soft and amber and she looked like the most specific and irreplaceable thing in any room I have ever stood in. I thought about the envelope. I thought about 9 days. I thought about standing in a parking garage on a Thursday afternoon and waiting for Gregory to tell me whether my daughter was legally mine. I thought about how I already knew she was mine in the only way that had ever felt real to me, and how the law required me to prove it anyway, and how the proof cost something even when it came back the way I needed it to. I thought about what Diane had calculated. She had calculated that she had leverage. She had calculated that the threat of Nathan, of everything, would keep me compliant. She had calculated that the test could become a door she could open or close depending on which result was more useful. She had run the math and arrived at a strategy and deployed it with the confidence of someone who had thought it through carefully. She had not calculated the judge. She had not calculated 16 years on the family court bench and a woman who knew what a timeline looked like when someone was using a child as a tool. She had not calculated that the truth was not going to change because she had filed a document about it. Emma starts kindergarten in the fall. She has been talking about it for 3 months already, the way children talk about large upcoming events, with a mixture of excitement and gravity that is completely outsized and completely correct. She tells me every few days what she is going to wear on the first day. The answer changes every time. Currently it is a yellow dress because yellow, she informs me, is her favorite color. I told her yellow is a good choice. She tilted her head the way she tilts her head when she is considering something. Then she said, "Daddy, do you think my teacher will be nice?" I said, "I think you will make her nice." She thought about that for a second. Then she nodded as if I had said something that made complete sense and went back to what she was doing. I stood there for a moment. I thought, this is the thing that was on that kitchen table. This is what was in the envelope. This small person who tilts her head and decides her teachers will be nice and changes her mind about yellow dresses every 3 days. This is what was in the balance during those 9 days. She was never in any real balance. She was always mine. But she was in the legal balance, which is a different and terrible place for a child to be without knowing it, and getting her out of it cost all the things it cost, the 9 days, the lawyer fees, the family fracture, the 3 hours at the kitchen table with Nathan, the 40-minute phone calls with Diane about pickup schedules, the years of a sealed room that I maintain with the same careful attention that I give to everything that matters. Here is what I want you to take from this. Diane sat across from me with an envelope and a calculated threat and 2 years of strategy, and she believed she had found the exact pressure point that would make me fold. And she was not entirely wrong. The pressure point was real. The threat was real. The cost of fighting it the wrong way would have been real. She had done the work of understanding where I was vulnerable and she had pressed it. What she had not done was understand what I was willing to pay to not fold. That is the thing about pressure points. They tell you where someone can be hurt. They do not tell you whether hurting them will produce compliance or resistance. She pressed mine and she found out which one I was. I was not willing to fold. Not on Emma. Not on that. And every decision she made to weaponize my daughter, to use a child's identity as a legal tool, to deploy my brother's worst mistake as a threat, every one of those decisions is a thing she has to live with now. Not as punishment. As fact. As the thing that happened, documented, decided upon by a judge who asked several questions phrased as questions and functioning as observations. Emma does not know any of this. Emma is 5 and she is worried about whether her kindergarten teacher will be nice and whether yellow is the right dress choice. Emma is fine. Emma is completely, entirely fine, and making sure she stayed that way is what every single day of the last 2 years was for. She tilted her head and said, "Daddy, do you think my teacher will be nice?" That tilt. That head. My nose, my mother's eyes. Not a question. Never a question. Not to me. Not for 9 days and not for 5 years and not for any amount of money or legal strategy or envelope slid across kitchen tables with 2 fingers and a prepared face. Mine.